to hire people now. But brilliantly, such projects also create supply for the future. They also make us more competitive for the future. And furthermore, if you fund a lot of these projects through public-private partnerships, they will be paid for. They don't add to the long-run deficit. And also, there's this wonderful thing of leverage. You know, the CEA report on the stimulus package in July there was a very good last section there saying about 300 to 400 billion of the stimulus package, or actually I guess it was 100 to 200 billion, had leverage with the private sector of 3 to 4 times. That's the kind of project where a little government money on an infrastructure project can bring in a lot of money. A little money on alternative energy can bring in a lot of money. A little money on R&D. So I would urge you to think about leverage where a dollar of fiscal spending, and this is spending money primarily, or targeted tax relief can leverage a lot of private money. And of course, what we're talking about, how we started the program today, is exactly that. We're talking about partnership where the government isn't putting in many resources at all, it's putting in some, but you mobilize the private sector. So that's, aggregate demand is the issue. We have limited fiscal tools, but I think if we focus on infrastructure, you focus on education, you focus on R&D, alternative energy, places where the private sector really wants to be with you, you'll get a lot of leverage and you'll get some jobs.
I'm going to let, I'd like to hear Paul chime in, and then Mark, maybe you can address another source of uncertainty that's at least been expressed, and that's regulatory uncertainty, and then I think we can wrap up. So.
I'm going to demonstrate that the chairman of this committee faces an unruly membership, has their own mind. But I want to assure you that my psychology will not be affected by returning to the tax rate, which you expect that are in existing law. And given the deficit we have, I'm just repeating the arguments, if you're looking for the priorities of where to provide some stimulus, the most unlikely place to apply stimulus would be for those that already have so much of the wealth of the country that has been accumulated over 2 decades, when the people under 250,000 have had no increase in real income during this period of time. And it seems to me the argument, whatever the precise number is very strong. In fact, I don't understand the opposite argument, but that's beside the point, maybe.
All right. Mark?
I have a couple of quick comments on what's been said before and then on regulation. What Penny drove in this process for me will ultimately lead to a crisp answer to the question you were asking about what works. If you're able to analyze this broadly across the country, then you can figure out what's working, what's not, and what's getting the best return. And when we talk about uncertainty, Marty's comment, which in many ways I agree with on housing is so driving profoundly the problems in the country. One of his comments was, look, I think we should aggressively deal with principal modification, that whole discussion. Well, if you want, the other side of that is if you really want to increase uncertainty, go deal with principal modification, okay? Because there's a whole market out there that's assuming you're not going to deal with principal modification. So I think that's why you're paid, the big bucks, I guess. You have to figure out which of these two it really is, because that narrow issue could really create more uncertainty than it's solving, at least if it's done in a incorrect way. On regulation for a second, one suggestion that I've heard, I didn't come up with, another fellow mentioned to me, is that if you look at the aggregate economy and you say, for a variety of reasons, this administration has had to deal with healthcare and energy and education and financial re-regulation of all 4 of these, and that by definition, when you re-regulate whole sectors of the economy, in this case 4 huge sectors of the economy, you do create uncertainty, particularly when the rules need to then be rethought. That could you possibly think about this in the context of a pay-go, where for every incremental regulation you're putting in place, you're looking at the last few decades of regulation that are already in place, and you're taking something off the table. A practical example of that today, I think, is Secretary Geithner must be dealing with the whole issue of mortgages and how you regulate mortgages on a go-forward basis. And there are multiple constituencies within that, including we decided for a variety of reasons not to consolidate regulatory bodies in the United States. And each, several of them have their mandate for how they want mortgages to be regulated. Well, is that a good idea? You're going to ultimately have at least 2, possibly 3 major forms of mortgage opportunity or mortgage forms or mortgage regulation in the U.S. And it seems that if you couldn't get rid of, because for whatever reason politically it wasn't the right thing to do, these multiple agencies, if the objective is to provide clarity to the consumer and to the financial institutions of how a mortgage is done, then maybe you come up with one mortgage, one way to approach that, as opposed to 3 separate ones, which is probably where it's going today. So whether the concept of pay-go could completely apply or not, if you were to provide a clarity to the administration that it's not just added regulation, there's something else that has to come off the table, I think that would go a long way to, or at least part way, to dealing with some of Bill and Marty's comments.
Well, I want to pick up on this because I think, Mark, you did a masterful summary of some of the challenges we faced. The reforms that we saw, let's just take the financial sector. I think most of us would agree that the rules that had been in place weren't working. If they had been working, then we wouldn't have found ourselves in the mess that we were in. By definition, if you are reworking the rules for a financial sector that had grown to 30% of our economy, then that's going to be disruptive, and that's challenging. I think you are absolutely right that having taken a series of steps that were necessary, it's important now that there is a period of healing and consolidation and implementation that is less disruptive. And I also think that part of that process involves going through what's already on the books to see, are there areas that have outlived their usefulness, that no longer serve a function, particularly if you've got a new set of rules in place that are going more directly to current economic arrangements. And so OIRA, the agency that's charged with looking through rules, I mean, part of what we've been in discussions with them about is how do we take old rules off the books, not just add new rules on. And that's something that we want to move forward very aggressively on. In fact, when the Business Roundtable came to us with a list of things that they felt were adding uncertainty, I mean, I will tell you, some of the things they had on the list, which were equal pay for equal work laws, our attitude was, feel certain that I think women should be paid as much as men. And, if you should just take that to the bank, that's something that I think is the right thing to do. There were other areas where they had some legitimate concerns that you had contradictory regulations that were working at odds with each other, and really at this point didn't make sense. And what we're trying to do is go through very systematically to see where we can eliminate unnecessary red tape, unnecessary bureaucracy, regulations that have outlived their usefulness. And what we're also trying to do is make sure that in the implementation of the new rules that have been put in place, that there's a collaborative process so that people have input and can get some confidence that these aren't just being put together willy-nilly. I will tell you that there are some examples, the one you just raised, for example, if we've got too many forms that are regulating mortgages, where we fought pretty hard to try to streamline it. It was tough. There are a whole host of jurisdictional and political issues that come up, and we'll continue to try to work on that front. But I think your general point that you can't just add new laws without taking away some that don't make sense is important. I also want to pick up on the point Laura made about taxes. We'll have to have a longer conversation about why we think businesses choose to invest or don't invest, where the sources of uncertainty are. I've said publicly, and Tim and I and Larry and Austin and others have talked extensively both in private and publicly. We would be very interested in finding ways to lower the corporate tax rate so that companies that are operating overseas can do so effectively and aren't put at a competitive disadvantage. We'd like to do so and figure out a way to do it that's revenue neutral. Because, you know, as you pointed out, just as some of Martin's prescriptions might in some cases add uncertainty, and so we end up having contradictory imperatives. The same is true on tax policy. You know, look, I'd be the most popular president on earth if I could just eliminate all taxes, except then people want to pay for stuff and also want to make sure that we're closing our deficit and make sure that Social Security and Medicare are there for future generations, and make sure that our kids are learning, and make sure that we have good roads so that we can drive to the Gap or McDonald's and spend our money. And that means we're going to have to make some choices. But I do want to say to this group, and I know that there was a subgroup that already worked on this, and it was somewhat inconclusive, but I'd like to continue to drive forward. If there are ideas whereby we can lower corporate tax rates in a way that does not massively add to our deficit, but instead revolves around closing loopholes, much in the way the last major tax overhaul in '86 was able to square the circle. That is something that we would be very interested in. We think could eliminate uncertainty, might reduce each of your bills for accounting and legal services, and could be a win-win for everybody. And that's an area that we'd like to collaborate on. So, Mr. Chairman, anything you want to close with?
Well, just on this sort of uncertainty, there are two things on my list that I give priority to. One is the corporate tax situation, which is a mess. Mm-hmm. And the other is getting those little trade agreements through, which disturb people when obviously protectionist pressures are rising. Mm-hmm. And I think both of those agreements are in our interest. They're small, they're minor, but they give a signal, an important signal right now.
I agree. And Korea is not so minor, especially when the EU and Canada have already wrapped up trade agreements with Korea.
Yeah, so it's more important to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, see, this was a fun conversation. Went a little off script, which is good. I liked it.
Amazing.
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much, everybody. And I'm looking forward to. I like the fact, by the way, that our cabinet members were able to join this. I think this is a format that will work better for future meetings. Thank you.
Thank you.